Well, thanks for having me, Pablo. I was, during the first session, wondering why did you invite me? And at some points I thought, there's no reason I should be here. I don't understand. And at other moments I thought, oh, I do. Now I realize what I can probably add to the day. So I'll do my best to add to the discussion of the morning. So I'm an American, as you hear, but I've lived in Europe for 36 years already, so I'm more European than most of you, because I've been here longer. And I'm by far the oldest person here today, which is a strange feeling. Anyway, I'm a calligrapher, and I don't quite know how that happened, but I tumbled into a career of calligraphy because my studies were actually art history, and I did a doctorate in London on German art historical methodology. And I think it was books this thick that in the end put me off German methodology. And at the same time, just so that if you're at the student level, maybe a personal story does help you understand how subject your life can be to forces beyond your control. I was also taking calligraphy courses in London at the same time as doing my PhD. That was a separate institution and a separate world. So from Monday to Thursday, I was in the British Library doing very intense research and using only my brain when it wasn't falling asleep. And on Friday and Saturday, I was writing letters, learning very, very formal, traditional writing at a very English calligraphy school, which, because it was so traditional, no longer exists. And when the reality hit, when both studies were finished, and I tried to find a job in the academic world as an art historian, and I discovered that I wasn't a very good art historian, and I had to do something else. So a calligrapher, a very famous calligrapher in those days in England, was looking for an assistant, and I proposed myself and I got that job. And so for a year I was an assistant to this man doing very standard work, just writing all day long with, I took out my knife, I sharpened this, and I put names on certificates for a year. So at the end of the year, I was quite good at sharpening a feather, and I didn't want to work for him after that. So I started on my own, and that was rather difficult until the moment I met Peter Greenaway. I'll tell you about that in a minute. A film director. If you're younger, you might not know his name, but if you're older, you would. And that changed a lot. That and some other things led me to look at writing in a very, very different way than I believe most other calligraphers do. And it led me to investigate the three great segments or traditions of world writing in a way that I don't think anybody else is doing right now. And so I want to start with this and not spend too much time going into it. But there's one very important thing I want you to realize, and if you can just take this from the day, it's already quite interesting. There are basically three kinds of writing alive in the world today. You have in the middle the Latin tradition, which extends around the world. It's related to the Greek, the Cyrillic, but it's also related actually in its origins to Hebrew, and in its later development even to Tibetan, Thai, Burmese. They all come from the same source. And all of those traditions have, besides being phonetic, they have one thing in common, and that is that each letter occupies a relatively similar sized space. And you can put them right next to each other in a row. So that's, the phonetic systems work that way. The letters row up. You can't look at this middle example and say one letter is more dominant or graphically more important than another. They all have a kind of gridded structure. And this gridded structure goes way back, all the way to the Greek times. So we could say of Western writing, we were typographers from the very beginning. And it should be no surprise that successful industrial typography would arise with this script rather than the other two. Now, the second kind of writing, which is phonetic, grew out of the first kind. So this is a branch of the Phoenician, the phonetic system. The Arabic system added, at the time of the Quran, one very particular thing that it did not have. But you had Arabic writing before the Quran, then you have the Quran, and new writing is developed for the Quran. And it does one particular thing that doesn't exist anywhere else, and that is it joins letters. So I need to kind of get in here, or if there's a stick I can point. There's some nice ones out there. Yeah. I always wind up pointing at things. No, right here in this bucket. That's too big. How about this? Okay, this is dangerous, putting this in my hands. If you know your Arabic, how many people here know a bit about Arabic? Well, you have connections that must exist. So this letter here must connect to that one, must connect, must connect. So those 4 letters, it is required that they flow and connect into each other. There are other letters which are not allowed to connect. So this is M and Z and A. The M and the Z must connect, law. The Z and the A may not connect, law. The Ein that follows the A may not connect, law. The next letter, the N, must connect. So this is exceptional. Our writing, if we do our, let's get this out of the way. In our writing system, if we connect an E to a T or a T to an O, it doesn't matter. There's no laws on that. In handwriting, you may at school get some laws, some rules from your teachers, but they're not part of the system of legibility. So that's quite different, and it means that when the Arabs sat down to try to create typography, it proved to be nearly impossible until modern technology. Chinese, on the other hand, you will notice, is also grouped. Every character occupies the same sort of rectangle, right? You can all see that? And what happens in Chinese is that you could print it because you can have a little block for every character. And in fact, they did. They invented movable type way before the West ever did, but it never really worked. And why would that be? It's because there's more than 10,000 different characters. So you could never really make enough blocks and organize your type cases successfully to create something that would work in practice. And so the Chinese, although they printed early, tended to do it with wooden blocks where you were carving the letters into the surface. The difference, of course, between Chinese and the other two is that it's ideographic. You have characters which have a pictorial element and characters that have a sound element. So that is the reason there's so many characters. Now these 3 different systems, when I started to observe them, I looked at the aesthetics, just what does it look like? And why does it look like that? And then I started to work that into, let's see if I can find the button, work that into my own work. And what happened right at the beginning was I got a phone call from this film director, Peter Greenaway, and he asked me to do some writing for a film. This is a photo from the film, another photo from the film, and we may even have, if it works, let's see, a little video of the writing going on to show you the speed with which it's done. Am I standing in anybody's way here? Yours, I think. No, it's not. Okay. And okay, that's what I want to show now is, in this you can see the story that I want to tell you. It's very simple to understand. When they started making this film called Prospero's Books, they started with another calligrapher. And that other calligrapher had been trained in the traditional way and had been writing like this. And when they saw that in the film, they rejected it completely because the image quality is not strong. Its typographic quality is reached at the expense of its image quality. Do you understand what I'm saying there? So it's boring. Let's just put it in a word. It's boring. So we had to do it all over again, and I used what I was looking at in the Arab scripts and in the Chinese scripts and tried to throw that all into it and see if there was some way of bringing the Western writing to life and at a high speed as well. And then I started to apply it to other things. So the same principle can be taken to Gothic. Here's our typographic tradition, as it were. I call it typography by hand. at the top. And here's what you might do with it if you let it loose. What is the sacrifice here? Legibility. If you go too far, you lose your legibility. I can look at Arab script. Here's a very early Kufic script at the top, used for the Quran. And I can make Western writing, Latin writing, which is inspired by this at the top. You may not be able to read it, but it says, undoubtedly you will be puzzled. Can you see it now? Okay. Sometimes, and this is, you're not a semiotician. What are you? What philosophies are you studying?
I teach.
Okay, well, I heard Wittgenstein go by.
Design, so it's kind of, I do know a little bit of semiotics, yeah.
Yeah, what interests me is this horrible, crippling problem I think that we have as Western users of writing or of typography in assuming that the legibility is entirely in the shape of the letter. You'll understand what I mean as soon as I say the context matters immensely. If you can begin a word, your semantic understanding takes over, and the rest of the word doesn't have to be so legible because you're already into it. You can start legibly and you can peter out. These are things that typographers don't naturally do because they tend to be very much keyboard limited. Instead of getting up off your butt, going back down to a table, getting a pen and ink and doing something, letting it dry, scan it in, and manipulate it, most graphic designers will prefer to stay at their screen because there's some kind of sticky thing keeping them to it. Or you can take Chinese and also adapt its principles to the Western script. As you see here, some of these are written with a brush, others are done with the hand, and so some are heavy, some are light. The legibility is high, but it does some things also which one tends to avoid with the Latin alphabet, and that is the stacking principle. So one letter above another. It's not that big a deal. People tend to avoid it, but you see it in Chinese all the time. So it turned out that calligraphy was, for me, became a sort of cross-cultural study. And the result would be a kind of writing like this, which again is actually, this is about the real size, by the way. So it's done with this, but used in such a way that this is destroyed in the process. And all these different lessons are being brought in. The extension of the Arabic calligraphy in the horizontal direction. The great big dark areas which you get from much of Chinese calligraphy. Very legible passages as well, because again the semantic issues, the linguistic issues, how do you read it? That interests me in a work of art very much. Can you read anything? Here? Are any words?
Far too something.
Far too soon. There you. Mm-hmm. So far too are very clear, and soon is a guess. But there's not many words in English that you would put there, so you can make an informed guess. And above that, it will end far too soon. So these are, as it were, my, what do you call it, outpourings of a suffering artist heart that take the form of canvases. See again, sense of failure. Who said that all creatives are insecure? Boy, don't be a creative. It's misery. And then another thing I find myself reacting to these days is the street. There's the world of calligraphy that I was raised in from the 80s to 10 years ago or so began to die. Demographics took over, and they didn't keep up with the learning curve, and so the calligraphy wave of the mid 20th century started petering out, and now there's this new one, which especially is coming out of places like Russia, where there's an immense movement of calligraphy right now, and it's informed by some things that were not part of the calligraphy tradition before, one of them being Gothic, interestingly enough. I'm fascinated by the whole semiotics of Gothic, which started as a monastic script, became the standard image of a religious text for the West, got totally screwed up by the Nazis, the wickedness that the Nazis put onto it reattached itself to AC/DC and metal music, where it became the risky thing that made your parents really angry. And now it's been, as it were, completely, well, not completely, but it's been washed clear of sin and is now a standard thing that calligraphers all over the place do because they like the look of it. And now, since we're in the middle of that look, I can't deconstruct the reasons for liking it yet. We need to wait a few years, and then I can figure out. I think it's because it's the easiest style to do. And we live in the age of calligraphy light. So if you tick hipster calligraphy in, this is what you get. This is not surprising anybody, right? Okay. So my favorite hashtag is this one. I think if I sit down, maybe I'll calm down. Okay. And so I spent a lot of time, this is going to be too difficult. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the letters can do as shapes. So that is literally taking, as it were, 26 zones of shape. Every letter has possibilities. And some letters have more than others. If I asked you to give me 10 different A's, you could do it. If I asked you to give me 10 different O's, you'd have a little more trouble there. So some letters are more productive than others, but what can you do with them? And here again, inspired by some of the geometric Arabic work, is a piece that's, again, the original is about this size, which is text. And I'll add one other statement, which is, I do a lot of commercial work, which you'll see, but when I do personal work where I get to choose the text, I actually make the text. So the first letter the pen makes, I'm not sure what that's going to be until the pen does it, and then a word forms, and then a sentence forms, and then the text carries on. And the challenge for me then is to, as it were, round out my idea by the time the page is full. And I find that that's really exciting, to be busy with the thought process is creating the language, and the pen creating the actual shape of the word. To me, it's one process. Okay, so here's this pillow book. I promised I would never talk about this again because the film is now 22 years in the past. It's archive material, which means I'm archived. And yet it was a wonderful project. How many of you have seen it? 1, 2. Okay. Go to the library, check it out. There's a lot of great nude bodies in this film. And I wrote on all of them. And so what this is a film by Peter Greenaway. He's now probably in his last creative phase. He's well above 70. And this was the third or the fourth project we did together, actually. There was somebody that was also saying artists don't all get mentioned. Was that you, Jeroen? Yeah. And in a film they do? Well, in a film they do, but there's another side to that, too. The producer of the film, or the head of any artistic process, may be getting his ideas from somewhere down the line, down the ladder, and he pumps them up to his level with the talents he has, but they'd never exist without the whole process. That's important to remember, too. So, and in this case, he at least gave me one-on-one credit for the fact that he had a calligraphy he could work with. So he thought, well, I'll do a film all about calligraphy because I know a calligrapher who can help me do it. So I take credit at least for that. Well, in the pillow book, what happens is Vivian Wu and Ewan McGregor, ladies, fall in love with each other, and they express this love by writing on each other's bodies. So they want to unite this otherwise Western split between body and soul, mind and heart, by making love both with a pen and with their bodies. And I got to do great stuff because of that. So I'm not going to spend a vast amount of time showing it, but here you have Vivian. The metaphor here was beautiful. He projects Roman law, a Roman inscription, onto her face. That makes her, as it were, forever. You know, those kinds of letters are forever. So he fixes his love with her forever. And then he fills in the letters on her face with a brush and ink, which is my hand, of course. You know, you just see this much. And then, so you've got the projection and you've got the letters. And then he moves her head like this to give her a kiss. And when he does that, the letters go out of register. So that's a sort of beautiful metaphor for how love can send you completely out of whack. And then he puts her back, and he registers her again. So not only does love throw you completely off, but love puts you right back together again. So these are these lovely, as it were, conceptual games. I never said calligraphy was a boring job, by the way. So here they are. We'll just watch them for a moment. There should be sound, but it doesn't matter. It's a beautiful song by Gwetch Patti here, Un ange baume, un ange tombe. And so here it was, she's writing on his legs below, and he's written the Lord's Prayer. He's trying to think, what's the most sacred thing I can do? And he writes the Lord's Prayer on her in English, and then when the English ran out, he continues on in Latin in red. Now, we don't have the sound, but the interesting thing here, again, is that oh, by the way, he wasn't a calligrapher, so I'm just supposed to do kind of normal letters. You hear the sound being sung, you see the subtitle of the sound, you see the text on her arm, and you see the titles of the books, and you actually can follow the text at all 4 levels. So again, to emphasize what I said earlier, that we can be slaves to clarity in communication, we don't need to be. Human beings can take in an awful lot of information, and the artist's job is to guide and sort that information in a way that intrigues, pulls people in. Not that you don't have to give always clarity. You can intrigue, you can mystify, as long as you get people involved. So we'll just watch as we descend.
I like the perforations in the wall.
Yes. Well, maybe we should put some piercings in at this point to update the film. I always thought this film came just before the tattoo rage, and I always thought we may in some way be guilty for kicking that off. Okay. So let's see if I can, yeah. This is a baby sumo. He wasn't even full grown. And he took I think 4 hours to cover with calligraphy. Okay, so from the film, which was fantastic to work on these bodies, and incredibly difficult because the shapes are complex, and to try to make a decent composition on a body was really, really rough. But it was exciting to work on human skin. It was exciting to work with a person. Explain what am I doing to you today, Vivian? And then I thought, well, a sheet of paper is a rather flat thing to work on, so I started making sculptural shapes in plaster, which I could then write on in the round. So to me, this was an extension of paper into the 3rd dimension, essentially. They're made in plaster, the typical studio technique, and in this particular case, the text is not in ink on the body. It's with a knife cut into the surface. And what I want to say about at that point is, for me, the feedback from the tool, so the actual hand process, what the material feels like, and what the tool wants to do, is absolutely crucial to what happens in the process. For me to force my will on a process would probably mean the results would be really bad. The process is what it is, and you somehow need to get into the energy of that process. And if it's a knife in plaster, you're not going to make flowing, elegant forms. It just won't do it. So you wind up making sharp, rather violent cuts in the surface. And the text followed that. So the text that I'm creating spontaneously becomes violent, becomes cut, becomes wounded, and the whole thing becomes this exploration of the fact that everybody is wounded, that all of us carry wounds, and the longer you live, the more wounds you carry, and you just have to deal with it. I made a male figure again after the female figure, and here the next step was I made an original, and then I made molds and cast 8 bodies. So it's like making sheets of paper just in the round, and each one can be treated differently in that case, and that looks like that. But you can see this is wounded. Later I'll show you one where it's written on, and it's a very different feeling. Did I say that they could ask questions?
Not yet.
You can ask questions, or you can stop and say that's rubbish, or whatever. Anybody want to ask a question?
I was just wondering if you ever, because you're merging different systems, well, the different conventional calligraphic systems, but do you ever experiment with visual form, like Apollinaire did, for example?
Not that much, but yeah, a little.
Okay.
Not in order to make an, as it were, a reference to a landscape or a bird or a.
Okay.
I've never been so keen on that myself.
Okay.
I mean, I respect very much the calligram. So if you don't know, Apollinaire published engraved versions or typographic versions of drawings he made during the First World War, where the writing might fall like rain, or the writing might look like the shape of a bird or a fountain or something like that. And this has its equivalent, especially in Arabic calligraphy, where the shape of a horse might be filled with writing. You've probably all seen that. That's never spoken to me personally.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe someday. Back to Greenaway. So one of the challenges with a man like Peter Greenaway is that he's doing so many different kinds of things that he comes to me with a new project. And one is, okay, now we're going to write on bodies. The next one is, now we're going to write on the buildings of Bologna. It was cultural capital of Europe in 2000. And so we have to solve that problem. What's going to happen now? How do we do this? And in this case, we really started to refine the way that we film calligraphy. So I'll just show you a couple of photos. This is writing that's been done on a rolling table, which I'll show you in a moment. And so the camera is in a fixed position and the paper is rolling by the camera, which means that the hand can stay working in one spot. And then this would be digitally edited to be projected on this large scale. And here's a little bit just of the pen in motion. We don't have our sound, but it is Mozart at this point. Just hum some Mozart to yourself. So you heard me complain a little bit about the traditional English education, right? But on the other hand, it's really good to have a solid academic grounding for experimentation. I know that in the art academies, they tend not to do that with the students these days, to subject a student to a lot of life drawing or whatever in the classic academic way. And calligraphy probably should be compared more to music in that sense than to drawing or painting, because there's a certain repertoire of things that we need to know to get started. And the question for the teacher of calligraphy, and I've done a lot of that, is make sure you are paying good attention to each student and don't force too much tradition onto them, or know when to stop, and know when to mix play and discipline. Getting that mix right with each student is really crucial. Otherwise, you kill their love of it. And the most important thing is to find that thing that triggers their passion. And luckily, I had that at just about the right moment. Okay, so there we go. I've done opera performances with him. I'll just zip through a couple of... this was in the opera in Berlin. So the writing, again, is happening in front of you. It's not still. It's moving. Another opera, this was in Amsterdam, it was called Writing to Vermeer, where the writing is just part of the set, essentially. That was a fantastic opera. Calligraphy that had to be done for, this is the Italian pavilion in Shanghai. So this is, again, a Greenaway project. Just give you a few images. If you want to ask questions, please do. So here you have, again, I'm having to use my historical knowledge to write the name Michelangelo in a convincingly 16th century script.
Is this live as well?
No, this is still. This is still. What was live here was the dancer going around the room with the sensors. So he was making a kind of choreographed movement, and the calligraphy is still. And every now and then I am foolish enough to think that maybe I could be an artist if I just tried really hard. Those are difficult moments. And I do get to do projects, so sometimes it seems to work all right. This was an installation in a summer arts festival on the coast called Beaufort. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. And I was given this 14th century chapel to work with. One of the things that engages me is our transition from the physical book with paper to other kinds of information carriers, and all the large questions that hang on that transition. And one of the opportunities is, of course, that I can get limitless numbers of books for free. You want a set of encyclopedias or whatever, you can have. They will give it to you. The libraries don't want them anymore. So I was thinking about this vast graveyard of books that we now will have confronting us in the West, certainly. The libraries are de-accessing, is that the word? Books. If they haven't been checked out for 80 days or 4 months, they're taken off the shelves, and at the end of the year they give them away, or you can buy them for 10 cents or something like that. It's a phenomenal process when you think of what the book was in European history as a valuable and sacred object. This is changing. So I made a graveyard of books. It's about 500 books painted black here. And then I did various operations. I tried to have a resurrection on one side and, as it were, a damnation on the other. So the damnation is just this incredible confusion of marks and words and language, and it's like all the books are rotting together. And then the other side is the ecstasy, where the books, I actually took a lot of them and dipped them in ink and then just frisbeed them across the room until they fell on the paper, and you get this wonderful mark. So there you have that. It's daylight behind this, creating the effect. So in this sense, calligraphy or writing leads into a kind of conceptual art, I suppose. I say it very humbly. Here's the whole installation, and just a couple of details. I use typography. The uglier the typeface, the more I like it. Okay. Oh, do we need to bother with this? It was really about institutional structures. I just put this in while I was sitting behind there because there was all this question about what are the systems by which we teach, and I thought I would just tell you the one by which I teach, or did teach in Belgium. And I taught a lot of workshops. So this is the hobby level, and the hobby level is mostly female, and in those days mostly over 40. That's all fine. But at a certain point, I had been teaching in that world quite a lot, and I decided I don't need to always do that forever. But when I tried to stop, there was just fury, because I think I was fairly good at it. So what I did was I taught some teachers, and I wrote them 5 handbooks, and I said, this is how you use the handbooks. And then they set up a website and a system, and this is it. And that worked. So you can work completely outside the official system. There's now about 30 teachers and 600 permanent students in this system. And I never even go to the website. So things can take care of themselves. Okay. Another Greenaway project. In Berlin at the Jewish Museum. This was called Obedience. It was about the Abraham and Isaac story, where God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. Have y'all ever encountered that story? Y'all know the story? Does it shock you that God would ask somebody to do that? Well, yeah. So this whole exhibition was asking, does the fact that the 3 Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that this is the founding story, has that introduced a basic strain of violence into our cultures? That was the question being posed by this exhibition. And I think, give a golden medal to the Jewish Museum for being brave enough to ask that question. So here's one room in which the pen is writing, I am Ishmael, I am Isaac, because in Islam it's Ishmael that's going to get sacrificed, not Isaac. And then on the other side, I have to be a child in all languages. So I had to imitate a child in Japanese, I had to imitate a child in Thai, and imitate a child in every language I could think of. So there's this sort of schizophrenic side to being a calligrapher. You have to be somebody else all of a sudden, like an actor. And this is just a little idea of how the transition from paper to the screen is made. In this case, yeah, it's worth it these days for you to see what you can do. Okay, so here's the paper, here's the calligrapher, here's the writing happening. The camera is, you can't see it, but it's here, looking straight down. And there's a monitor because we're really tight in a big movement of the pen, and I'd go right off screen. You understand? It's really tight in, so I don't look at my hand, I look at that, and then I stay nicely framed that way. And then this guy is pulling the paper so that the calligraphy, the pen can always work in the same spot. Okay? Now, that wasn't working so well, I felt, so I've developed this table now which has a kind of crank. And the camera's on top of the table, and if somebody else is turning the crank very slowly, the table goes by and the camera's picking up the calligraphy that way. That works really quite well, except sometimes, like when you cross a T, you go back. So I have to say to the guy, slow down, speed up, speed up. So I think the next thing would be like a sewing machine treadle where I can make the table go the speed I need it to go. And here is that process in action. So in this case, there's the table. The guy, you can't see the guy. He's down here turning. And there's a mirror, and the camera's there. So in this case, we're filming over 90 degrees, which doubles the distance, which was useful in that particular case. Okay, this is another setup, which is a box with a glass and a camera inside. And this is for performances, so the camera picks up the live writing, flips it, and sends it onto a screen. And this is my really great friend, my Wacom tablet and stylus. Some calligraphy is generated straight on screen, and a great deal is not. But the reason I show this is because I want to emphasize again that I don't think I would ever want to break the relationship with my table in the other room and the real ink. The real materials where you really get dirty, they inform you. The material world has its own language or languages that it speaks to you. The digital world doesn't really have that to the same degree or in the same way. So for me, still, the analog world is not letting me go. You could say that's a generational thing, I suppose. Wall calligraphy in the Jewish Museum. Just give you a few examples of applied work now. So how does this sort of thing happen? I fly into Berlin. This was Greenaway's wife in that case. Comes in and says, "Oh, there you are, Brody. This is the first room we're going to do. I want these in these 3 languages. I've got a plane to catch. Bye." So you have, and this, since I have room after room after room to do, I have to do this room just in a day. That's a day. Okay, no planning. You just start. And that's, again, a question of experience to be able to do that. More typographic kind of letter, written with a brush. It was a very interesting and moving exhibition, the Abraham and Isaac one. All right. Sculptures. I'm not at all, let's say, I'm not intimidated by scale or technology. So my laser company in Bruges they're my best friends. We do all sorts of things together. Metal is a fantastic way of working with script. In this case, I was asked by the city to do 3 monuments as part of a festival on the theme of Central Europe. So I chose 3 figures from Central European intellectual history that interested me. And this is Copernicus. That's what this says, believe it or not. It's written in the ovals of the movements of the planetary bodies. This is Jan Palach from Prague. And this is Mendelssohn, the philosopher from Dessau, speaking of Bauhaus, after all. This is, by the way, 27 meters long. And Belgium's great because they don't care about the safety issues. I said, well, what if somebody climbs on this, falls, catches their leg in the E, and is hanging there upside down all night? I said, well, they shouldn't do that. In America, you would not get this commission. You couldn't do it because the safety people would come in and say, you can never protect the public from this. So, bravo, Belgium. A monument for Hans Memling in a church in Bruges, again, laser work. I guess the thing to say is that every one of these projects is a combination of the physical requirements. So you're taken to the church and they say, where do you think the monument should go in this church? And you look around and it's filled, everything's filled. The only thing that's not filled is the column itself. So you think, how about that? And they say, fine, but you cannot drill into the column to attach it. So then you get another set of parameters and difficulties that you have to think. So this is actually not attached, this is just touching the column, but from all sides, with pins that we could gently screw out until it was tight. So these are commissions that, where the creative side very much has to do with responding to a context and to a content at the same time. A sculpture for a client in Veurne near the coast. In this case, I really got to do this one exactly the way I wanted to. This is in stainless steel, lasered out, and then the shape was made by literally beating it with a hammer, which I did for about 3 weeks, until I thought my arm would fall off. But it turned out quite well, I thought. It's what I did in this case. They're a transportation company, trucking company. I just looked around in the offices and took their transportation forms and then reworked those and then had them lasered out. So if you read this, it talks about kilometers and benzene and what they're carrying to what German city and so on. Looked like that. Okay. How's my time? Okay, right. I'll just quickly, this for Dries van Noten. Beer. Whiskey. A restaurant. Juice. Stamps for the Belgian post office. Calligraphy. Do you know Marcel Wanders? Mooi from Amsterdam. I've worked a lot with him. Back to Dries van Noten. This was funny. They said the client says, because it's a big dinner, so they want the place cards on the plates. So fine, I can do that. He says, will it wash off? Yeah, sure. Afterwards, it washes off. They didn't need to bother. Everybody stole the plates. There were no plates left. So there they are. Okay, this is another Marcel Wanders project. This was last year. This huge book where the collection of the Rijksmuseum is presented together with calligraphy. So I'll just show you a few pages of that. The book is this. Okay. Right. I'm not sure I need to say something about everything. Wall text. This was a project in the Kasteel of Dursel in Hingene, not far from Antwerp, in which people were allowed to send in texts. And then the whole walls, all the walls were covered in text, 25,000 words. You can sleep with me. Okay, now here's another, back to serious matters. Writing on the sculpture instead of scratching in, I think gives an incredibly different feeling, sense to whether you would try to read it, how you feel, where it hits you in your body, the writing, the combination of form and word. Oh, okay, and here's another one, big project. So Belgium's good in that sense. You do get these decent projects here. What would you like to do with this chapel, they ask. I would like to do that. Okay, so I did. And again, I said, you know, the kids in the neighborhood might want to climb on this. It's all right. So this is near in Heestert, near Zwevegem in West Flanders. It's about 70 something sheets of corten steel, 1.5 by 3 meters, laser cut and fitted together to make this big construction. And here, it was basically I presented an idea, and that was fine, and we went on with it. This is another one. This is just happening now. This will be the largest bell in Germany, 24 tons. It will be cast in November, and I was responsible I had to make all these letters in wax. So I never worked in wax in my life, so now you get to start learning wax. I love the learning curve, where you spend 2 or 3 days not knowing what the hell you're doing, and then maybe you figure out, and then you figure a little more out, and by the time you've done all this, you know quite a lot about wax, and you can do other things. So I can start to create other things. The next step for me will be to make bronze sculptures, I think, with writing, because now I've learned to make the wax. It's easy, I should imagine. Anyway, I really enjoy it. This is 4 meters tall, just to give you an idea. And, oh yeah, okay, we might finish with this. But there's no sound, so you'll have to read the subtitles. Okay, so, right. I hope, even if you're not particularly interested in calligraphy, that I've convinced you that it's quite a wide field, and that somehow, I've never quite figured out how, but for 30 years I've managed to feed my family, with a quill pen and the other instruments you see there. The great thing about it is that no 2 days are the same. It's always a different commission, always responding to the situation of that commission. And as somebody else said, you never stop learning. Certainly. The technology is always ahead. The other calligraphers, you have to make sure you're ahead of them. So it's been quite an interesting career so far. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Yeah?
You write in all languages. Do you try to understand what you're writing, or
Mm-hmm.
you don't care, it's just an image for you?
Oh, well, first of all, I've done commissions in Arabic, and I've taken Arabic, I've studied Arabic, but it's a difficult language. But the rules on which Arabic calligraphy are based are so strict that if that were to be shown in an Arab country, they would just fall off their chair laughing. I know that. So it would be foolish for me really trying to venture into that world. Chinese, I studied the language, but the technique of the brushwork is so difficult. That would be something that it would take a good 5 to 10 years to learn. So I would have to start now and hope to get there before I stop working altogether. So I've never done commissions in Chinese. And in the pillow book, when you saw Japanese or Chinese on the bodies, I had an assistant for that. So anything that's Latin-based, Cyrillic, that's all fine. I don't speak Russian, but I wouldn't want to write it if I didn't know what I was saying, because you would want to... The words tell you what style to develop, and you want the shape of the word to be right for the word, or the shape of the style to be right for the whole text. So in principle, anything done in the Western or Cyrillic tradition would be fine. But one has to respect the language.
And you've never been fooled that somebody says, yeah, you're writing this, and then it turns out to be something dirty or something?
Oh, no, I don't know. That's never happened. I have heard of cases where people got tattoos in Chinese and the character is actually wrong. But you've probably heard those stories too. No, that hasn't happened. No, not so far.
How many languages do you
German's fine, French, Italian, Flemish, English, a little bit of Arabic and a little Chinese. But really little Arabic and Chinese. But the other 5 are okay. Something like that. So, be nice to learn a Slavic language.
You said that in the movie for Chinese and Japanese, you had an assistant.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was the role of that assistant?
Well, I was just the art director in that case, and so the body would be there, and it was a very tricky. Again, because Peter Greenaway, the words mattered immensely. Every body text he had written himself, usually in the style of some old poetry, so even a Chinese reader might think it's old poetry, and he had assistants to help him with that, obviously. But he would want specific words to be here because he has this idea the camera is going to be here, and I want it to be talking about I embraced her with my arm here, or something like that. So I'd have to count the characters, and I would say to my assistant, Yuki, where's the part about the arm? She'd say from here to here, 5 characters. Okay, so then I would draw with a white pencil 5 boxes.
Yeah, but there's a great deal of interpretation. It's interesting that it's not just like a technical thing that she's doing, but she's also trying to, in a way, kind of design with you.
Yeah, we had to sit there and design. We had these kind of sheets that I'd made with gridded body, and we would plot out where all the characters would go, and then we would go to Greenaway and say, well, what's the feeling here? And he would say, I want this very formal and rigid, or I want this very flowing, I want this, or I'd say, well, it's a sumo guy, and I knew from Yuki that there was a specific style associated with sumo posters. So I said, would you like us to use this particular style? Yeah, great, fine. So that's what we did in his case. So I think there were certainly 3 of us at least always discussing, and then she had to do the brushwork, no question. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's a relationship between music and like the structure and whatnot of learning calligraphy.
Yeah.
And the laws. I've seen some people, like especially graffiti artists and also some dancers that are using their bodies.
Yeah.
And like, like writing on a really large scale.
Mm.
Is this something that excites you?
Oh, immensely, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
to use this as a dance? Like
Yeah.
your whole body is your
No question, yeah. And
have you done?
yeah, quite a lot. And I mean, if you just think about it, the thing that comes to my mind is Mozart because of that bit there. If his rhythms are da-dun, da-dun, dun, da-dun, dun, da, da-dun, da-dun, dun, da-dun, dun, da, that translates very easily into line. Those rhythms you can move your hand to and make writing. The trick would be to make those marks also into letters. But that can be done. And that relationship with a paintbrush and figurative painting is somehow different, I find. You wouldn't immediately paint to a musical rhythm, but you could easily do calligraphy to a musical rhythm. And then from there, you stop just using this, you start using this, then you use this, and then you basically move your entire body in the process. And recently I've gone one step further and started doing body prints, where I get covered in paint and then the paper is applied to me, and then so I become the brush in that case. Yeah. Okay.
Within your commercial work, do you notice or observe a tendency of brands to go back to calligraphic roots, to go back to, because it's more authentic, it kind of speaks more, because it looks like it's manually created? Or is that just me thinking?
No, well, I'm old now, so I've seen this trend, this cycle happen at least 3 times in my career. And yes, there is this big thing happening now. The hipster thing has really brought it on. There's some idea of the authenticity of the message if it's handwritten. And that has brought about a lot of people studying gesture and its meaning, semiotics of gesture in Western or even global culture, so that you can imagine some big companies who we might not like would use some kind of a gestural style to sell themselves as being more human, more immediate. So a lot of graphic design agencies have realized that it communicates something smaller, more human, more intimate, the gesture, and are incorporating that again. Mostly it's a fake kind of thing. what this hipster thing, the chalkboard writing in restaurants, do we give that any more time than anything else as a trend? I don't know. I would assume it's a trend like another, which is gone in 5 years.
Do you think it breathes new life into the calligraphic tradition or into the discipline itself? Because in the face of typography, digital typography nowadays, it's kind of diminishing in stature a lot. I don't think a lot of people or a lot of students like to do it.
Digital typography?
No, like manual calligraphy.
Right.
With digital, you can do a lot more and it's quicker.
You
it's
can.
faster.
Yeah. And the effects are sometimes better. I mean, I use a lot of digital. What I'll tend to do is, but again, I have a trained hand, but I'll tend to go down to my desk and throw it on there, ink and paper and whatever pen, and maybe changing pens until I find the one that's giving the line that feels right. But I won't worry whether it's perfect by any means. And then that gets scanned in, and then that gets assembled. If there's a bad letter A, take it out, put in a better one from one of my other sketches, and so on. So the digital side speeds it up, but also gives you the chance to finesse it more. I would never say that there's something wrong with that. The hipster movement, it's all a bit calligraphy light. They're trying to do it without really doing the hard work. And I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man who says, well, in my day, we had to make a perfect O 1,000 times in a week or whatever. But on the other hand, the ability to breed varieties, to spin it out in different directions so that you can really be a creative designer, I think that does depend on really investigating what the shapes of the letters can do. And that means a lot of playtime with letters. So inasmuch as people are, as it were, trying to shortcut that will limit their possibilities. But the other thing is, I think it's probably a trend. Like, we're just a society of trends, Out of that will come a few people who really do amazing stuff, and they'll stick with it. So that's monkeys and typewriters. Yeah.
It's the imperfections that make something sublime, right? That's what draws me to calligraphy in a sense, because even a small mistake, it's a translation or an articulation of something inside you. So in that sense, it's a work of art, writing a letter.
Yeah.
And,
well, I remember when I was fairly early on, somebody said to me, because my work had the tendency to be a bit too finished, he said, just show the search. Don't hide the search in the sketching stage, which is then perfected in the final piece. Just show it. Let us have it all. And that was very liberating to realize that that there doesn't have to be a mask of perfection on top of things. And I think, in a way, writing, since it is the visual metaphor for thought, if you show your scratching out, your misspellings, your changes, like a literary manuscript where they're trying to find their words, it in a way becomes a visual metaphor for the search for meaning and the search to understand something. Okay.
Sorry. I don't know if I'm going to express this the right way, but it seems like calligraphy has a structure and a way of teaching that could be interesting to cross with some other practice, like to create something new. Do you think? Can you think of any reference like that calligraphy has been used along with something else to create something?
The specific thing that always comes to mind there is, like, we live in a wonderful age for children's books. I mean, there's so many fantastic illustrators doing children's books. Oh, and also the Tekenromans, how do we call that in English? The graphic novels. But especially in the children's books, they'll often put a really banal typeface next to these beautiful illustrations. And given how easy it is now with the software to design a font, I don't understand why they're not custom designing a font to go with the style of a particular illustrator, so that the two work together. If you see in some Chinese ink painting, the same brush is used for the calligraphy on the ink painting as for the mountains or whatever it is they're painting, the bamboo, and you can hardly tell where the illustration stops and the writing begins. The fusion is so sophisticated and perfect. And I don't see why we couldn't do that in our world of illustration. But the other thing that we haven't talked about, and that is that I think that at this point still everybody goes to school and learns how to read and write. And I think that writing, and then writing goes through gradations into calligraphy. It's not writing here and calligraphy there. There's a kind of a gray zone. That could be used in a lot of community projects, especially in the world we're in now, where we have people living in Hasselt from all different writing traditions. I mean, you will have people here who write Urdu and Arabic and Hindi and Chinese and Japanese. They're all living right here. So why aren't we using that to make some, like the Book of Hasselt, where the writing traditions are the most, the clearest representation of that diversity. You could say to all these people, okay, draw me something, but that's not going to say India, Yemen, China as clearly as if they wrote. The writing is the badge or the public face of your culture in a certain sense, and since everybody does it, it's already here. So I think it's not the answer to your question, but it's where my thoughts go with that.
Yeah, my question also, thank you for your answer, but my question is also, like, for example, to teach calligraphy, and some people do it about to think about, mindfulness and meditation, or like to talk about emotional intelligence, or all these layers that go into expression. Like, okay, these are kind of obvious already.
Well, they're not being done very much. Yeah.
Okay, but if you have gone, or if you see any experience of using calligraphy in a hacked way, like in a twist way, I think it was so interesting and exciting for you.
Maybe I'm leading a sheltered life, but I think there could be more. I know, for example, in France, there are more calligraphers doing Asian calligraphy than Western calligraphy, and the reason is because it's attached to meditation. So that has become a big thing there. I don't know how true that is in Belgium, and why not? I mean, more of that, please. I would say the tendency right now in the schools, elementary schools, to get rid of handwriting, they should be going the opposite direction, more with the hands. And maybe there even brushwork and meditation, something to calm down the little guys, because they need it. So suggestions welcomed, really, I would say.
I really like this thing that you said of doing like a kind of collection of the writing of different people. It really touched me a lot. It made me think, because I think that's already a suggestion, like maybe more you throwing it to us. Because we always think perhaps on the most obvious layer, and it's also related to what the girl there was asking you about more meaning and about, we tend to translate, we'll make text in different languages so that people can understand, but why not text written like by the hand of different people that expresses much more than
Well, what we did in Bruges, it started, I'm sure you have here, the Night of the Museums, where the museums are open till midnight, and at the last minute, they wanted a project for this immense medieval building we have in Bruges. It's called the St. Jan's Museum. It's a really beautiful space. And they came to me and they said, Brody, we have no money and 2 weeks to organize this. And so I had an idea, strangely enough. And it was simply, I emailed all my calligrapher friends from all the different traditions, the ones that lived in Belgium. And for that night, we got Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, Hebrew, Arabic, then we did medieval and Greek, Russian, and I had a tagger, and a few other languages. I don't remember what. And we put them in this long room, just one table after another, about 3 meters in between. Everybody's wearing white. The lighting is way down. There's just a lamp on each desk, and everybody's writing their language. No fancy. I said, I don't need any melodrama here. Just write. And then the public came through, and it was required to be silent. Well, in that night we had 1,500 people come through, and then we did it in Ghent, and we had 3,000 people, and I've done it in Germany for 3,000 people. It symbolizes what our society could be. really.
Also, for me, it symbolizes what I think Annalise was talking about, this subjective atlas, you know? Like you are mapping like this unconscious through the handwriting.
And then when you tell the people, hey, you know what, these people all live in Belgium, you know, that's the amazing thing. Mm.
That tells much more about
Yeah.
the culture than any kind of interpretation
Yeah,
of text or
yeah.
translation.
And it's the one time as a calligrapher, I didn't feel I had to explain anything. It defined itself. So I do it in Hasselt. I call it a brush with silence. That's the name of the event. And it's very easy to organize. Yeah. Mm. Okay. Yes?
Do you sometimes bring different styles together and just form something new or your own?
Oh yeah. You need to go to my Instagram in that case, because I right now I'm playing with that. There was that Arabic one that I used, the Kufi style, and I'm mixing that with the style from the Yellow Submarine period in record covers from the 60s. Big fat balloon letters, basically, and somehow and if you throw in a little bit of Gothic, it's really fun. Yeah. Basically, you could take anything and turn it into an alphabet. You know that, graphic design teachers make you do these exercises where you have to find an alphabet on the street or whatever. But then the next stage would be to write it with some instrument and turn that into a reasonably flowing process. And out of that, you start to get new shapes. I think the graffiti people know all about that. And that's really what they do better than any calligrapher in that sense. Yeah. Mm.
What passions you as a calligrapher? Because you started as an art critic, art historian,
Yeah.
and doing some calligraphy on the side.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't, and then you talked about you have to, as a teacher, you have to find what your students are passionate about, and foster that, and facilitate that process and development.
Yeah.
But what impassioned you, or what made you to make the step towards calligraphy and keep on doing it all these years? Is it?
Well, I became a calligrapher because of moving several times as a child from the States to Germany and back to the States. And at each of those stages, I had to change my handwriting because I was leaving one school system and entering another. And something about that fascinated me, and so I kept doing it. And then when I had to choose a career, well, it chose me, as I said. But I think what keeps me going is that it's got so many facets. Intellectual side, craft side, social side, context side, semiotic side. That is all just, it pushes every button I can imagine. I wouldn't know how painting could do that, to be honest. And also global side. Now with looking at the Brush with Silence event and the way, what I'm doing right now is for Arte Television is a 3-part documentary on the origins and future of writing, globally speaking. So looking at how writing began in China, in the Middle East, and in Central America, how those traditions developed, what happened when they made the transition to print, and what the digital age is doing to writing. Because here's this weird thing. We invented the technology in the West, both for printing in the first place and the digital technology that we all use every minute of the day. Well, what's happening in the West is that handwriting is dying. But precisely in China, the digital shift is requiring them, though they just reintroduced calligraphy in all elementary schools in China. Mandatory subject, again in China. And why? Because the touch screen, that's yours. They use a touch screen and they start to write the character, and the phone recognizes it before they're finished. So they can go really fast because they only have to write half of it. But that means they never write the other half, which means they're forgetting. So the government says we can't let people forget the script. So, because if you think we're proud of the Latin alphabet, well, maybe we're not. But anyway, the Chinese are proud of their script in a way you can't imagine. It would be the way an American is proud of the Constitution, or used to be. is the way they're proud of their script. It is China, so they're not going to let it go. But the technology started to threaten it, and the result was a reversal. Yeah, I'm not sure what question I was answering there. But yeah, okay.
Passion is clear.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting, yeah. Okay, you probably wanted to get to your next
No, but
speaker.
thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you for having me.